Excuse me, is Greg here? Thank you.
What if I told you that one of the most brutal, inaccessible, and downright offensive forms of music ever created was also one of the most influential forces in metal history? I'm talking about death metal. To most people, it's just noise, and honestly, I get it. I remember being a kid in my 8th grade art class, and our teacher would allow us to bring music into play for the class. I brought in Morbid Angel. Like, imagine me in 1994 playing this in front of my class. Pain is too godliness. The reaction was fucking insane. People started screaming, and not in a good way. They had this violent, negative reaction like they were being physically assaulted by the sound. My first time hearing Cannibal Corpse, I actually had a similar reaction. I was at a point in my life where I was getting into metal, but I just wanted things heavier, always heavier, more intense. So a friend of mine lent me Butchered at Birth. I didn't know anything about it, so I just threw it on in the car with my dad driving me home from school, and the first thing we both heard was the intro to Meat Hook's Sodomy. You should have seen his face. My immediate thought was, what the fuck is this noise? But that noise, that chaotic, terrifying noise, was a revelation. It functioned as a full-blown production revolution rather than just another subgenre. I mean, thrash was definitely a huge step forward, but death metal was the first time that metal really transcended what a lot of people would even think of as music. And it became something that you needed to basically be initiated into the cult to even comprehend. It was a sound that was so extreme that it forced engineers to throw out the rock and roll production rulebook and invent a new one from scratch. Downtuned guitars, blast beats, extreme vocals, these were all totally new things, never before seen in 300 plus years of Western music, and they required a whole new approach to production. The techniques that they developed out of necessity became the foundation for how almost all of heavy music is produced up till this day. Death metal did not just change metal. In many ways, it built the sonic architecture for the modern metal world as we know it. And today we're going to break down the production innovations that made it all possible. For those who don't know me, I'm Eyal Levi, CEO of URM Academy. I've been a producer and the guitarist in my band Doth since 1999, and I've been obsessed with this stuff for way longer than that. To understand death metal's impact, you have to remember the sonic landscape of extreme metal in the mid to late 1980s. Thrash was king. You had Metallica's Master of Puppets, Megadeth's Peace Sells, and the undisputed benchmark for sonic aggression, Slayer's Rain and Blood. These records were heavy, fast, and aggressive, but from a production standpoint, they were still playing in the rock and roll sandbox. The drum sounds, while punchy, were generally natural, with audible room ambience and a sense of space that felt organic. The guitar tones were sharp and cutting, but they hadn't yet reached the levels of extreme saturation and low-end girth that would come to define death metal. The mixes were loud and in your face, but the overall philosophy was still about capturing the energy of a band playing in a room. Something was bubbling under the surface though. A generation of musicians heard Slayer and wanted to push things even further. And that impulse for sonic escalation created this whole host of problems that the current production playbook had no answers for. The revolution was coming, and its epicenter was, of all places, Florida. The late 80s and early 90s Florida death metal scene was a perfect storm. You had this incredible concentration of talent. Death, Morbid Angel, Obituary, Deicide, and Cannibal Corpse, all pushing each other to be faster, heavier, and more technical. And they all had a home base. Morrisound Recordings in Tampa. At the helm was a producer who would become synonymous with the genre, Scott Burns. Scott, along with guys like Colin Richardson in the UK, didn't just record death metal, they invented how to do it. They understood the music was a constant fight for frequencies. Everything is distorted. Everything is stepping on top of everything else. The music has to be meticulously carved to make any sense. You couldn't just mix it like a rock record because it would turn to noisy, flubby-tubby garbage. So this gave birth to the Morrisound sound. Tight, dry, and gated drums, ultra-defined high-gain rhythm guitars, and vocals placed aggressively up front. The goal wasn't really ambience or vibe. It was maximum clarity and aggression in a style where every instrument is fighting for sonic space. The studio became a destination, creating a feedback loop where bands went to get that sound, and in doing so, helped Burns refine it even further. This was the birth of the specialist metal producer, and it was the music itself that forced these innovations. And speaking of producing and mixing death metal, this video is brought to you by Nail the Mix. If you want to learn how to mix and master metal, Nail the Mix is the place to do it, straight from the best. Mixers like Will Putney, Buster Odeholm, Jens Bogren, Nolly, TLA, David Bendeth, and artists such as Gojira, Meshuggah, Periphery, Opeth, Nickelback, and over 100 more. At the start of the month, we released the raw multi-tracks from the session so you can download them straight into your DAW and mix the song from scratch. Getting your hands on this kind of source material is an incredible learning opportunity, just so you can see what the standard really is like at this level. Then, at the end of the month, the mixer does a live stream where they break down exactly how they mixed it on the record and answers your questions live. You can also join our monthly mixing competition. Submit your mix, vote for your favorites, and win prizes like microphones, guitars, plugins, gear, and a lot more cool stuff. And your membership comes packed with extras. All the URM plugins, MixLab with over 150 tutorials, Riff Hard for guitarists, and access to our private community on Discord and Facebook. So if you're serious about leveling up your mixes and learning from the very best, check out nailthemix.com today. It's at the link in the description of this video. The first and most obvious change was the vocals. You went from the shouts of Tom Araya and James Hetfield to the guttural growls of Glenn Benton. And the high-pitched shrieks of Chuck Schuldiner. This was a definite break from the past because now vocals were being used as a percussive and textural instrument. From a production standpoint, this created a new challenge. How do you take a vocal that's basically a low mid-frequency roar and get it to sit nicely in a dense mix without turning everything to mud? Early death metal producers figured out that you had to treat it almost like another guitar. It needed aggressive EQ, often with a high-end boost to bring out the articulation and overtones, and sometimes a bit of distortion to help it cut through. Short, subtle delays and reverbs were used to give it a sense of space without washing it out. This technique of treating vocals like a rhythmic textural element rather than a purely melodic one is still fundamental to how extreme vocals are mixed today. Next, the drums. Death metal weaponized the blast beat, turning it into an Olympic feat. The blast beat quickly became the undisputed language of extremity in the underground, but its influence didn't stop there. The technique was so effective and powerful that it eventually broke containment. By the early 2000s, you started hearing it in the music of some of the biggest metal bands on the planet. A perfect example is 3-0 by Slipknot, where Joey Jordison laid down some sick blasts in this riff. And keep in mind, this was a multi-platinum album. That was a watershed moment because what was once the sole property of the underground now was mainstream and being broadcast to full arenas. It made blast beats a permanent and essential tool in the mainstream metal vocabulary. But the spread of the blast beat didn't happen easily. The pursuit of speed created a fucking massive production problem. You were facing a nearly solid wall of sound coming off of the kicks and a blur of snare hits. The biggest enemy was cymbal bleed. When a drummer is playing that fast, the cymbals are constantly ringing, and that sound bleeds into every single drum mic, especially the tom and the snare mics. I've worked with many death metal drummers, and they love to pack as many drums and cymbals into as tight of an area as possible. When you have a microphone on a tom with a cymbal an inch away, you're going to get a lot of bleed, and those blasts of weird cymbal frequencies in your tom tracks make for a worse listening experience. The solution was twofold. Something that required a change in technology and a change in philosophy. First, triggers and sample replacement became standard practice. The goal was sonic control, going far beyond simply fixing a performance. A triggered kick drum, often blended from multiple samples, could provide a consistent, powerful, and clean transient that would cut through the mix in a way an acoustic kick struggling under downtuned guitars just couldn't. It just couldn't cut it. That's where that modern clicky kick sound comes from. It was born out of necessity. Producers could replace the live kick and snare sounds with powerful, clean samples, but keep the live overhead mics for cymbals. This gave them the best of both worlds, superhuman power with human feel. Second, the philosophy of hands win emerged. Drummers found that when focusing on incredibly complex and fast footwork, their hand performance would suffer. Their snare hits and tom hits would just sound weaker. A common, though definitely not universal, studio trick was to have the drummer record the song without playing the kick drums at all. They'd focus only only on delivering the most powerful grooving performance with their hands. The kick drums, which were likely going to be sample replaced anyways, could then be programmed in perfectly later. It's a workflow that prioritizes the most irreplaceable part of the performance, the human feel of the hands. This need for precision led to the rise of grid-based editing. To make these incredibly fast parts intelligible, they had to be tight. A great editor knows how to tighten a performance to be precise while preserving the natural push and pull of the drummer. Often, this means quantizing to something like 90% instead of 100% to keep that human variation. This meticulous approach to drum editing, born in death metal, is now the standard for almost every modern metal subgenre. This is the direct ancestor of the machine gun kick drums you hear in a Lorna Shore or a Slaughter to Prevail track. The guitars also underwent a massive transformation, both in tone and application. The quest for heaviness led to widespread downtuning, often to D, C, or even lower. I know that nowadays, tuning down to D doesn't seem low, but you gotta think about the fact that tuning to E flat in those days was considered low. However, all this low tuning meant less definition, which again created a new set of tonal challenges. In the US, the Morrisound approach focused on high-gain amps and a technique that would be debated for decades, scooping the mids. And for the record, I hate the rules of always scoop mids or never scoop mids. It's always context appropriate. When you have downtuned guitars, bass, and kick drums all packed with low-end information, the mix becomes a muddy disaster. Producers had to carve out specific frequencies to create a pocket for each instrument to live in. They'd cut the low mids in the guitars to make room for the body of the snare and the vocals, while ensuring the high mids provided the pick attack and clarity. This concept of surgical subtractive EQ to create separation is the absolute core of metal mixing. This philosophy is why you can hear every intricate polyrhythmic chug in a Meshuggah or Periphery song. However, in Sweden, a different philosophy emerged. Studios like Sunlight, with producer Thomas Skosberg, pioneered the Boss HM2 chainsaw tone, maxing out every single knob to create this fuzzy, high mid-focus, nasty but amazing sound that was paradoxically clear. But that Swedish sound didn't stay raw forever. In the mid-90s, a new wave of bands from Gothenburg, Sweden started to ask a revolutionary question. What happens if you take the aggression of death metal and fuse it with the melodicism of bands like Iron Maiden? The result was melodic death metal, and it created a whole new sonic blueprint that would change everything again. Bands like At the Gates, In Flames, and over in the UK, Carcass, with their landmark Heartwork album, pioneered what became known as the Gothenburg sound. They kept the blast beats and the harsh vocals, but reintroduced soaring dual guitar harmonies and riffs that were undeniably catchy. The production also took a massive leap forward. I remember listening to Slaughter of the Soul by At the Gates, which was produced and mixed by Fredrik Nordstrom, and I thought to myself, this is the future. The production was so much cleaner and more powerful than most of the Morrisound stuff. It had all the aggression, but with insane precision, and dare I say it, catchiness. This sound, this formula of brutal verses, harmonized guitar hooks, and massive sounding production became the single biggest influence on the American metalcore explosion of the early 2000s. The influence of that melodic death metal scene is arguably one of the most dominant strains of DNA in mainstream heavy music today. At the same time that melody was being explored, there was another branch of death metal that was pushing in a completely opposite direction. They were focused on pure mind-bending technicality. This became known as technical death metal. While bands like Death had always been complex, albums like Human and the work of jazz fusion influenced bands like Cynic laid the groundwork for a style where musical proficiency was pushed to its absolute limit. This evolved even further with bands like Origin and Dying Fetus that combined the aggression of death metal with just staggering technicality. But the real revolution came with this German band called Necrophagist. Their album Epitaph became the gold standard for precision. The production was clean, sterile but somehow still alive, and inhumanly tight, and allowed every single note of their classically influenced lightning-fast riffs to be heard with perfect clarity. It was the sound of a surgical scalpel where other death metal was a chainsaw. This hyper-precise, almost clinical approach to production became the new benchmark for technicality. It directly influenced the sound of the entire modern tech death scene that followed, and furthermore, that focus on inhuman tightness and rhythmic complexity became a core component of early deathcore, where complex riffs and gravity blasts were combined with massive breakdowns. This, however, created a unique problem for bass guitar. I mean, how do you even make it audible? The solution was often to split the bass signal. You'd keep the low frequencies clean and powerful while heavily distorting the high frequencies so it could cut through like another guitar. Getting clarity out of low-end instruments is all about how they're represented in the mids and highs. The sonic principles forged in the early death metal scene did not just fade away. They became the blueprint for the next 30 years of metal production, while others evolved into the sophisticated tools we use today. Let's talk about the foundations we kept. First, the drum production philosophy. The idea of blending a live performance with samples is now basically the default setting for almost all heavy music recording. It provides the only reliable way to achieve both the brutal consistency and the sheer power required to compete in a modern mix. The sophisticated, multi-layered, velocity-sensitive drum libraries we use today are the direct technological descendants of the early rudimentary triggering pioneered at studios like Morrisound. Second, the surgical mix. The death metal approach of treating a mix like a puzzle, where every instrument gets its own frequency pocket, is now the core of how metal's mixed. The aggressive use of high and low pass filters to eliminate unnecessary frequency information and the surgical use of subtractive EQ are standard practice. This is what allows a band like Periphery to have 7, 8, 9 string guitars, 5 or 6 string basses, and complex kick drum patterns that all coexist with crystal clarity. We also kept layered high gain guitars, doubling and quadding rhythm guitars where you have either 1 or 2 hard left and 1 or 2 hard right. It creates an immense sense of width and power that a single guitar can rarely achieve. This technique is used everywhere, from the chunkiest deathcore breakdowns to the most atmospheric black gaze textures. We also kept extreme tunings and 7-string guitars. Death metal's relentless push for heaviness normalized extreme downtuning. While thrash bands flirted with D standard, death metal bands made C, B, and even lower tunings a legitimate sonic territory. Pioneers like Morbid Angel were already using 7-string guitars back in the 90s. This exploration into the sub-bass frequencies of the guitar created a sonic precedent. It directly paved the way for bands like Korn to take the 7-string guitar and its low A tuning into the mainstream, creating the foundation of the nu metal sound. Today, seeing bands with 7, 8, or even 9-string guitars is totally normal, built on a foundation that death metal established. Also, the specialist producer is now a normal thing. The era of death metal solidified the idea that producing metal is not a generalist's game. It requires a specific skill set and a deep understanding of the genre's conventions. Today, the metal world is run by specialist producers like Will Putney, Jens Bogren, Dave Otero, Nolly, and Eric Rutan, who are direct heirs to the legacy of Scott Burns and Colin Richardson. Bands seek them out for their specific sound, a concept that was born with death metal. Now let's talk about some of the relics and the evolutions. First, the chainsaw sound. The iconic Boss HM2 pedal sound is a great example of evolution. While it's no longer the default high gain tone for all metal, it's become a revered stylistic choice. Bands in the modern era use it specifically to evoke that old school Swedish vibe, turning what was once a tool of necessity into a powerful artistic statement. It didn't die, it became a classic. We also went from dry punch to lush ambience. The initial super dry, heavily gated drum sounds of early death metal were a direct reaction against the washy, reverb-soaked rock drums of the 1980s. The goal was ultimate tightness and punch. Over time, as technology improved, producers learned how to reintroduce ambience in a highly controlled manner. Now, a modern metal drum sound is often a complex blend of tight, close mics, carefully mixed real room mics, and high-quality digital reverbs. This gives us the best of both worlds, the articulate punch of the early death metal sound and the massive sense of space that makes a recording feel huge. And I think I should also mention the lo-fi sound, even though it's not strictly death metal. While the raw production aesthetic was present in some early death metal, it was really, truly embraced by the second wave of black metal in Norway, a conscious and artistic rejection of the high-fidelity, polished approach that the rest of the metal world was chasing. Death metal's production journey essentially created two paths, one towards surgical, powerful clarity, and one towards raw, atmospheric aggression. Both paths are still being explored today. So the next time you hear a death metal track and your first instinct is to call it noise, listen closer. You're hearing the sound of a rulebook being torn up and rewritten from scratch. You're hearing a sonic evolution that forced producers and engineers to innovate ways of recording that we still use today. Its greatest legacy wasn't just brutality, but it was the production revolution that it created out of pure necessity. It gave us the tools, techniques, and mindset that define how a modern metal record sounds. It didn't just push the boundaries of heavy, it built new ones. So how did death metal influence you? What's your favorite death metal record? Let me know in the comments below. As always, share, like, subscribe. See you next time.